When Patrick and Kelsey were little children, they would get rambunctious roughhousing together, as little kids do. And eventually, one would get mad at the other, and then there'd be fighting. And then Mom would have to go in and tell them to knock it off, and I would send them to their rooms to settle down. And Patrick would despair at being in the doghouse. He would immediately stand in his bedroom door crying, "Mom, I'm sorry, can I come out?" Kelsey would be so indignant at being censured when it was all Patrick's fault, she would give me a look as she strolled to her room, a look I have called the bad words I can't say in church look, and she would close the door. I would, after a reasonable and rather short time, go to the door and tell her, "You can come out now if you want." And she would give me that terrifying look again. That girl could stay mad. But I would just smile and gently close the door. And I'm telling you, she would sometimes, even after I said she could come out, stay in there for 2 hours or more. Eventually, she would open the door when she was ready and say, "Can I come out now, Mom?" And I would say, "Of course, honey. You could have come out any time you wanted." It was easy for them to be restored to my good graces because they were never out of my good graces. They were out of line, but they were not out of grace. I loved them. You know who else wasn't out of grace because of love? The tax collector, the hemorrhaging woman, the dead girl. By this point in Matthew's gospel, Jesus was going about Galilee, and crowds were amazed at his teaching, it says. And then, in chapters 8 and 9, Jesus has been on a grand miracle tour. A leper, a centurion's servant, Peter's mother-in-law, 2 demon-possessed men, the paralyzed man, all cured. He has even calmed the waters when the disciples thought that they were all going to drown in the storm in the Sea of Galilee. I don't think for a minute that word of Jesus wasn't spreading like wildfire, even without Twitter or TikTok. Just imagine the talk. And then we have Matthew sitting in the tax collector's booth. He is persona non grata among the people. He has a hard job that is despised as being in bed with empire and as being dishonest, because many were, maybe even Matthew. He's just sitting there on this busy day with people all around, people who disdain him. And a group is going by with this Jesus in the midst of it. This Jesus he's been hearing about from everybody. And he's thinking, a holy man? A miracle worker? He won't even deign to look at me. Right? And then, holy cow, Jesus looks Matthew in the eye and says, "Follow me." Matthew, the tax collector, and everybody around him must be just agape. Why is Jesus calling that guy? Oh, how a fire must have flared in Matthew's heart. And he suddenly was incredibly brave. And Matthew simply got up and followed. Matthew is restored at Jesus' invitation. No one is outcast to Jesus, to the God who loves us. And we have the story of the hemorrhaging woman, her pain and her search for a cure, and the desolation of being untouchable because she was considered unclean with her bleeding. And a group is going by with this Jesus in the midst of it. This Jesus she's been hearing about from everybody. She's thinking, a holy man? A miracle worker? Oh, he won't even deign to look at me. But she is desperate to be restored to community. And she suddenly was incredibly brave, and she reached out her fingers to touch just the fringe of his robe. A scandal. And Jesus says, "Take heart, daughter." And she is instantly cured. No one is an outcast to Jesus, to God who loves us. And the synagogue leader's daughter is dead. His desperation is even greater than the woman's, to have his child restored to him, to live again in community. And a group is going by, and this Jesus is in the midst of it. This Jesus he's been hearing about from everybody. He's thinking, a holy man, a miracle worker, is it even possible? And Jesus follows him home. Oh, the hope. And Jesus takes the girl by the hand, and she gets up. No one is too far gone for Jesus, for the God who loves us. The tax collector, the hemorrhaging woman, the dead girl, they were outside the community, but never outside Jesus' touch, outside of God's love. When Jesus came near, the community could no longer keep them out, because Jesus was about restoring community in a broken, divisive world. The Bible is full of restoration and the yearning for restoration. The Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann speaks of the prophets who continually admonished Israel to be in right relationship with God by being in right relationship with each other. And that's how the promised restoration they pleaded for would come. And the Jews of Jesus' time, they did know their Holy Scripture. Brueggemann wrote, "It is reported that the first apostles asked the risen Christ, 'Lord, is this the time when you will restore the kingdom of Israel?' They received no direct answer. It is clear in any case that what they hoped for is not what Christ promised. But what is clear in prophetic expectation is that restoration is indeed a gift from God. It is equally clear, however, that restoration is a human task. We are not passive recipients. We may have a decisive say in the shape of the restoration. In today's gospel, the human Jesus shows us the shape of restoration. If we are indeed followers of Jesus, then we must see the work of restoring that he does throughout his earthly ministry, showing us that no one is outside his grace, that he is here to restore community, and that everyone belongs in the community. And that was, and still is, earth-shattering. And that is our call as Christians, to make it so. When Jesus says, "Follow me," he has dinner with people we don't like. When Jesus says, "Take heart," he says no human being is unclean or unworthy. When Jesus takes you by the hand, even death is not a boundary. That gives me hope. We are God's beloved children. My son Patrick couldn't bear it if I was mad at him, even when he knew I could never not love him. Kelsey knew she could take her time and let her feelings calm down, because she knew I could never not love her. And I'm a flawed, sometimes crazy mom. You ask my daughter next time she's here. But they knew my love was unconditional. How much more can we rest in the grace of knowing that no one is too far outside of Jesus' love, and that no matter how hard we humans try to put other people outside barriers, Jesus is here to restore, even us. Because I think we've all probably felt that worry at one time or another, that feeling of being unlovable, that God might be angry or disappointed in us again. Could God be too disappointed to still love me? Our Western cultural heritage has leaned so heavily into our being unworthy, a burden that Christianity has added some bricks to as well. But that's not what Jesus was doing. God's self in the flesh of Jesus walked among us and loved even those who persecuted him, and he sought out people that others deemed unworthy. When Jesus came near, they were restored to full life, to even fuller life. John 10:10, I came that they may have life and have it more abundantly. And Paul, writing to the Romans, nothing will be able to separate us from the love of God in Jesus Christ. So this is knowledge that we must nurture inside each of us, because we're not perfect and we're not going to be. If you're like me, your experience of your own imperfection happens with some frequency. And yes, it worries us, right? We feel unworthy and outside of an inner circle of love. But we are called to remember our own belovedness in this life of following Jesus, so we can share that life with others. There's only one circle, and we're all in it. And when Jesus comes near with the power of his love, people are restored. Jesus turns the world of power and exclusion upside down. And you know what our world looks like when it's upside down? It looks like no one keeping anyone else outside of the community. And friends, Jesus left carrying on that restoration work to us. It's in our hands. So what would it look like for us as followers of Jesus to trust our belovedness enough to continue his work of turning the world upside down and restoring community to our world's intractable us versus them ethos? You know, I'm only 3 weeks in here at this parish, and I see that kind of work being done. I see the many ministries that are here, and I've met many of the people involved. I've met many committed people. I see around me the love for Reverend Matt and the sorrow of not having him here when he retires, being right alongside the joy for him of having a chance to live in a community in a different way that will bring him life. I see St. Mark's members who carried our banner at the Pride Mass at Grace Cathedral, bearing witness to our standing tall and out loud in support of our LGBTQ community that is again and ongoingly facing grave forces of harm and of bigotry. I met people who told me the reason they stopped into St. Mark's in the first place was because they saw a Black Lives Matter banner. I see that the Hotel de Zinc shelter for the homeless is going to be here in August. And all of this and more are ways of recognizing the one community of humanity that we are, the community that Jesus set about restoring. It matters because we are always tempted and harassed to close ranks, we humans, right? Throughout history. My and mine and NIMBY and holier than thou and purity. Call it what you will. There is so much more for us to do to turn this fraught world upside down. We're never going to be able to do all of it, but we continue to do our part of it and to stay alert and alive to the ways the Spirit is calling us to restore community among all God's beloved children through us. We will with God's help, right? And so here we are today, just sitting here on this busy Sunday, people all around, including people who may disagree with us. And this Jesus is in the midst of us. This Jesus we've been hearing about from everybody. And we're thinking, a holy man, a miracle worker, the Son of God. And he is with us. The fringe of his robe is always right at our fingertips. And now, holy cow, Jesus is looking us right in the eye and saying, "Follow me." Let's do it.